Hi, everybody. We are finally at the final stage. That was redundant. We have come to the end of our stages of the general method. We are finally at termination. The end is here. I think this is actually a really interesting stage. The concept of termination itself, it sounds like, okay, we're stopping, we're ending things. This is like the end of everything. But really, termination process has been going on since the very beginning stages when you're first meeting the client, and we'll kind of explain that. So I think there's such a depth and a beauty to termination, which might seem a little backwards and weird because there's also some grieving and loss that can be associated with termination. And I think that's kind of why I appreciate this stage, is because it does have that complexity and there's a lot of value that can come out of it. So some things we're going to go over today are looking at different types of termination, what it is, how to end the therapeutic relationship as a whole, how do you end a single session, not necessarily the whole relationship, and kind of processing the concept of termination as a loss. So what is termination? My nice little clip art says a time to say goodbye, but really it's the whole process of ending. It's not just the last session. It's not just the last time they walk out the door. It's this whole entire process because it provides an opportunity for the client to reflect and claim accomplishments and learning. And so it's just not the act of saying goodbye. It's that whole absorbing and acknowledging that this relationship had purpose. And now there is kind of wrapping up of it. So like I mentioned a little bit before, termination should have be already begun at the very first contact. And so if you're thinking back to the engagement stage, when you're going over informed consent, you're talking about how many sessions you're going to have. That piece right there is already introducing the concept of termination. Clients really need to understand and know clearly that this is not a permanent relationship in their life. It might be a very long-standing, ongoing relationship. Some people will have many years with the same social worker, and that is okay if it meets their needs and is providing appropriate services. But overall, the therapeutic relationship is not meant to be a permanent fixture in clients' lives. So it kind of, by introducing it already at the very first contact and kind of letting them know the expectations, like I'm here for a season, I'm here for a purpose, it's going to build some trust. A lot of times clients that we work with have experienced a lot of abandonment issues. And so knowing what to expect from a client or from a social worker up front is very, very important to model healthy relationships. And so if a client is anticipating that you're leaving, it might flare up some of those feelings of abandonment that they've experienced in the past, but you're taking the opportunity to model to them what healthy leaving a relationship can look like, because they're going to have people coming and going throughout their lives. And so it's showing them that it's possible to have a healthy relationship that does come to an end. And that's not necessarily going to be abandonment or that they did something wrong, that's just a natural part of relationships. Introducing termination at the beginning, it always helps the clients begin planning ahead, and it emphasizes the need that eventually they're going to have to learn how to use their skills independent of you. So the social worker is there to model and coach and reinforce and be a partner in the learning process, but eventually, because they're not going to be present for the rest of their lives, in order for the content to be learned that was learned in therapy to be important to stick, clients have to anticipate that at some point they're going to have to learn how to use their coping skills independently. They're going to have to figure out how to stay sober independently. They might have to manage their symptoms of anxiety and depression. Might have to keep a job. Those types of whatever set in the goal, they're eventually going to have to learn how to translate that into their everyday life without having the therapeutic support. A poorly timed termination could result in regression and failure towards goal accomplishment. And so leaving might feel like abandonment. It might trigger some uncomfortable feelings that they're trying to avoid. Their readiness or their stage of change isn't quite at a point where they're at that maintenance stage. And leaving the relationship early can really be detrimental to clients' confidence, clients' trust, and just clients' natural ability to do those things independently because they're just not there yet. And what's really important is to introduce the relationship like this as temporary, but making sure it's done in a strengths-based way, and it's not like I'm taking something away from you or this is a bad thing when I leave you, because termination can kind of have some of those negative connotations. Like if you're getting terminated from a job, you're losing a job, like, and that doesn't sound or feel very good. So it's really important to look at this stage and present it to the clients in a very, very strength-based way. And we're going to kind of go through that in a couple of slides, and hopefully it'll kind of make sense. So some of the steps that we have to be mindful when we are working towards and engaging in termination is that we're going to announce the process, like put words to it. We might know it's coming to an end, but we can't always assume that the client is aware that the relationship is coming to an end. And speaking it into the space, again, builds trust because they're not worried, well, this is going to be my last session. Is this person going to be there next time? And those types of discomfort and not necessarily healthy things. So just simply stating like, now we are ending. So like typically you'll have like, okay, insurance will have covered like 6 sessions, let's just say. So, when you're getting closer, you can kind of like count down and say, hey, this is how many sessions that we have left. And then doing some check-ins around there. Obviously, you can extend services when appropriate, but you're having those conversations. And so we can't always assume, like I said, that the clients are understanding that the relationship is ending, and they could be experiencing denial and grief around the relationship's end, and announcing it always, all of their feelings. I don't know what I'm trying. And announcing it always, all of their feelings to be addressed. It allows. It's not supposed to be always. Announcing it allows all of their feelings to be addressed in a safe place. And so you're inviting those conversations into the space instead of ignoring them or assuming that they can just deal with it and handle it. So we can talk about how do you feel? Like, how do you feel about the relationship ending? That's a great check-in questions. And so many clients that social work see, they do have those painful separations. There's lots of loss, unexpected terminations in their lives. And so if they naturally form some sort of attachment to you, the ending might trigger feelings from those previous losses that they have been avoiding. And so feelings that are often avoided in relationship ending are like that sense of abandonment, some helplessness, like, what am I going to do without this person in my life? Guilt, well, did I do something wrong? Am I not good enough? Am I just icky and they don't want to be around me anymore? Feeling of failure, like, oh, like we're done, but I didn't get through all my goals, or they don't want to continue with me because I've failed in some aspect. And feeling unlovable is a huge one too, that often that's kind of associated with people leaving, is because someone is unlovable, and then they can kind of transfer some of those feelings onto you as well. So some clients might be able to readily identify their feelings. Some may need more coaching and support and exploration. I think one thing to be mindful of too is like, you might have this conversation that your relationship is ending soon, and they might seem fine in session, but then the next session they don't show up, or the next session they come in with a lot of resistance or just an attitude, because they're processing those feelings of loss, and that's to be expected. And being able to sit and allow the client to express them and then reflect back on them is very powerful. When you start asking how they feel, it's really interesting that ending this relationship kind of can mirror the stages of grief. So there's 5 stages in grief. It's in grief and loss. So when somebody passes away, there's often this feeling of denial, and then it builds into anger and bargaining about what could I do? Is there anything I can do to make the situation change, even though there's not. There's like that period of depression, and then eventually leads to acceptance. This is a cycle that you can jump back to any stage at any time. But those things can be really present when a social worker is trying to terminate the relationship with the client. So a client might ignore that the social worker is discussing it. They, like I mentioned in the previous slide, they might start to disengage, start like coming late to sessions, be having atypical behavior because they don't want to acknowledge that it's true, and they're just trying to avoid maybe having those conversations or actually having full sessions that would result in termination. There might be some anger as well, and that's completely normal. May or may not be directed at the social worker. And so we talk about this in HIPSI, some of those negative coping skills or maladaptive behaviors. You're replacing or displacing your emotion at one thing onto something else that's safer. Clients might do that as well. They might also regress to an earlier problematic behavior in order to punish the social work or to punish the social or punish themselves. They might bargain, so like negotiating extension of time, and sometimes that might be appropriate, but if it's a firm boundary, you know, you have to respect that. They might promise to be good if they continue, because they might then feeling it's something that they're doing that's causing the termination. And now, honestly, sometimes that you might have to terminate because of something that the client is doing. So like if they were having some transference and they were like romantically interested in you and it wasn't a therapeutic relationship anymore and you couldn't work through it, you'd have to terminate. And so that might be a time where a client would try to bargain and say, hey, like I promise I'll stop if you just stay with me. Depression, so a client might manifest listlessness, little energy, and withdrawal. Pain is real and evident, and there again might be some regression during this. There is a time that is needed to mourn relationships. You play a significant role in clients' lives. They are inviting you into very intimate spaces where they're talking about really personal things, and that can be really hard to then kind of separate and realize, like, I've just given you all of this and now you're leaving me. It can be very, very difficult. But the goal is always to get them to be at some point acceptance. They don't necessarily have to like it or desire it, but they accept it and they know it's inevitable and they're going to move forward. So at this point, the client would be able to talk about the good and the bad, and is demonstrating new attachments, either to a new provider, let's say if you're leaving the agency, or to some other positive support in their life. This is kind of what I was referring back to with framing termination in a strengths-based way. This is a really good time to remember why you're terminating. It's because you've made progress and you don't need me in the same capacity anymore. And so framing it in that way can be really empowering. Like instead of seeing it as a punishment or something bad, it's really, we're terminating because we're celebrating you, that you've come so far. And that feels very different when you present it that way. So first, it's not the standard for all clients. Some clients won't make progress at all and you still have to terminate because insurance is up, they're moving, you're moving, or it's just not a therapeutic benefit anymore. So when the focus is on the celebration and like this new beginning, it conveys that the social worker's perception of the client's strengths, the resources, and they have the ability to maintain progress and changes independent of the therapeutic relationship. It does, like, it can speak volumes to a client that the social worker believes in them and their abilities outside of the therapeutic relationship. So then this opens up the opportunity to discuss the highlights of working together. So this is why great time to have those goals and evaluation, because you can look back and see like, hey, 6 months ago, you were drinking like a fish. Maybe not say it that way, but now you are only having 2 beers a day versus the 10. Like, and that's when I then do math, which ew. So if they've reduced, they're drinking 10 a day, now they're down to 2. Well, that's 8 less a day, 7 days a week. That's 56 beers a week. Times that by 4. Don't know that number. But then you can say like, hey, in this month, you've drank 224 beers less. I think that's right. And so that feels really celebratory. Like, maybe their goal was to quit drinking altogether. And it just hasn't been accomplished yet. But you can say like, hey, you're doing something where you're drinking 200 beers less a month. Times that by 12. If you keep this up for a year, that's, again, math, a lot of beers a year that you have not drank. So some of the things to keep in mind is, having those clearly measurable goals will really help because it makes it very powerful. Reflection questions that you can talk about when you're discussing, like, what have you done? Talking about if their initial concerns have changed, eliminated, reduced, managed. Do you understand yourself better? Do you feel more capable and confident to manage your concerns? Are you coping better? Are you going about your daily tasks reasonably well? So it's good for the clients to highlight their accomplishments. You want to look forward to the future, so asking them where they're headed. Just because therapy is over does not mean they are done making change. And so, you want to leave them with some sort of clear action plan of continuation to either maintain the progress they made or continue to push and challenge them themselves. And this also gives the social worker a chance to validate and praise the client for all their hard work. Then you want to check for unfinished business. fingers crossed they don't mention anything because that's a moment of panic. But you can anticipate that they might bring something up as that red herring